thought I didn't have time, but I actually had a lot of time looking back on it.
Yeah.
But yes, so I had set her aside, and I would have 2 or 3 hours where I could write. And I have a process where I'll turn on, kind of a playlist of movie soundtracks that I put on that kind of get me in the mode, and I'll sit there. And again, like working out for me, it's kind of a discipline where you sit down there. And I decided I was going to sit at the computer, or iPad in this case. And I said, you know what, I'm sitting here for my 2 hours today. And if I write 2 sentences, then that's what it is. And if I write 2,000 words, then that's what it is.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Robert Patton Global Podcast. I'm here today with a very special guest, John Prather. Is that Prather?
Yep.
I was going to say Prather.
Either way.
So, John Prather, you are an author and a foster. Do you do foster care, or did you adopt?
Yes. Both. I'm a foster parent. I've adopted. Yes, I'm an author. Done some fitness modeling. So started out as a foster parent, and then ended up adopting. I'm sure we'll get into it, but ended up adopting a couple of my kids. So yes.
So it starts off, because I'm actually interested in foster parenting, with the intent to adopt. And when I was reading about you and I saw that, I wanted to ask you about that. But maybe we can start a little bit before that.
Yeah.
Because, you're from Memphis, Tennessee,
yes.
and you now live in, Southern California. And so can you tell me how that, what prompted you to do that and how that's going?
Yeah. It's every day's an adventure out here. So it's something, and it's a complete culture shock from Memphis, Tennessee. So I grew up, I was born in Nebraska, a couple of years in Missouri, and then my parents moved to Memphis. And so I'm from a big family. I have 7 brothers and sisters.
Nice.
And so for me, I'd never been to California, never been to Los Angeles, but I grew up always saying, I'm going to move to LA. I'm going to move to LA. To me, it was like the land of opportunity. I was going to move to the West Coast. I was going to Los Angeles, and just, I've always been kind of a dreamer and wanted to try things. And so I always said I was going to. It took me longer to earn up enough money. And, my dad he got cancer. And so I had to stick around a little bit for that. So I got out to Los Angeles much later than I intended on. I was about 28 when I moved out here. And so, but I'm one of those people, I had no experience. I didn't know anything about any area of town. I just put a bunch of boxes of clothes in the back of my truck, and I started driving. And I came out here with no house, no job, no prospects, nothing. I'm surprised I made it, because I'm one of those people that my plan was to do it. And if it hadn't been for sheer willpower and determination, I would have been on the first bus back home. So it really is, it's surprising that I was able to stick it out and survive, but you kind of got to want to do that if you want to make it in Los Angeles, I feel like.
You were by yourself at the time?
Yeah, I was, I left. Everyone thought I was crazy because I left a job with a salary and a future and all that type of stuff, and just quit and came out here by myself, found a roommate situation, and did that for a little while. I eventually, a couple of years later, met my now wife. But yes, I came out here not knowing anything about anything or anyone. And it was a steep learning curve coming from Tennessee to move to Los Angeles. It really was. You
just had a dream.
Yeah.
And you believe in the law of attraction and that type of stuff? What you think about,
absolutely.
You bring about?
Yeah, I'm a very positive person. I agree. I think that and a good dose of determination, because a lot of things, it's easy to have a dream. I talk about this a lot. It's easy to have a dream, but a goal is different. A dream is easy. Everybody has one of those. Everybody, even where I grew up, everyone from Tennessee, a lot of people from Memphis, I'm going to move here. I'm going to go do that. I'm going to write a book. I'm going to do this, that, something else. And to me, that's all well and good. LA is a city of dreamers. But having a goal is different. Having a goal it's a dream with legs. It's you got to get up and do something about it every single day.
Yeah.
And so having a dream is great, but it's not necessarily good enough. You have to have that determination and that steadfastness to say, I'm going to stick with it no matter how tough it is, no matter how lonely I was out here for the first 6 months. I hated it. I would have moved back at a drop of a hat if I wasn't so determined to stay here. because it was tough. Everything was 3 times the price. People, I couldn't understand people. You have like, it's completely different mindset, a completely different attitude. Out here, everybody is, not to paint a really bad picture, but people are looking to move up the ladder any way they can. So it's easy to be fresh off the bus and get kind of run over or taken advantage of. So every day you kind of have to not defend yourself, but build up these walls to be able to stay kind of on your own path and not get used up or get trampled on. But at the same time, you have to kind of keep that hopeful, dreaming, kind, positive spirit going to be able, like you're saying, to attract that. So it's kind of a balance you have to walk that can be tough to do sometimes. And that goes not just Los Angeles, but anywhere. It's a big world out there, a lot to explore, but it takes some determination to go out there and explore it sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I hear that everyone's kind of out for themselves in LA. I grew up in Orange County to an extent, and I love the beach. I actually just got back from La Jolla, which is right.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah. It's so necessary because I'm living here in the mountains of Colorado I love it too, but it's been getting dark at 4:30.
Yeah.
And people have been, like going through some sort of seasonal depression or whatever. And I was just really craving some beach sunsets, and I was able to catch a couple of those while I was out there, and it was so rejuvenating. And like what you were saying about, to come back to what you were saying about dreams are one thing, but goals are more definitive, because you can daydream and never do anything about it. But with goals, you have inspiration, you take action, and you make, a step further towards that goal every day. And eventually, in a lot of instances, you reach that goal and then you set new goals. But dreams are fun, and you can dream. I want to get a plane at some point, and maybe not. I don't necessarily need to own my own plane, but just have access to like leasing or sharing a plane, because I want to be mobile and able to move around the world as I see fit. So that's kind of like a dream / goal. I've been putting it on my vision board now for the past like 5 years, and a lot of the stuff that I put on my vision board have come to fruition, but there's some that have not quite made it there. You wrote it, because I want to write a book, but you actually wrote a book, and you're like, or two, and you're working on your second and third one or something.
Yeah, and that's kind of what you're saying, actually, because every year, I'm not a big resolutions person, because I always feel like resolutions are kind of negative, kind of like you're talking about in the power of positivity. But goals, I always feel, are positive. So at the beginning of the year, I'll come up with 3 to 5 kind of goals that I want to accomplish during the year. And I sometimes hit some of them, sometimes miss them. But, resolutions, I feel like I want to stop smoking. I want to lose weight. I want to, stop doing this, doing that. Goals are, I try and look at the positive side of it. I want to be this generous and give away this much money. I want to write this book, and I want to accomplish this, set this powerlifting record, whatever it is. It's all kind of positive things for me. And the write a book, I grew up, listening to my grandfather's stories. He was a great storyteller, and I could just sit there and listen to him over and over and over again. He's one of my heroes. And he had a way of turning a phrase, of making the punchline interesting, no matter how many times I'd heard that same story. So I grew up loving the art of storytelling. And so every year on my goal list, it was, write a book. And I constantly had this goal, and it just kept getting bumped year to year to year. And then so one year, about probably 5 years ago now, I sat down, I was like, you know what, this is the year that I do it. It's done being kind of a dream. It's going to be a goal now. And I said, no matter how bad it is, no matter if anyone ever sees it, if it doesn't ever see the light of day, if it's the worst thing I've ever put on paper, I'm going to have a finished manuscript. I'm going to finish a story beginning to end, book level, book, length, and I'm just going to have a completed one. And so I did, and I sat down. And I just kind of, like, when I decided to move to LA, this was, a little bit after I decided to move here, I just decided I wasn't going to take, no wasn't going to be an answer for me. I was going to finish it. It could be very bad, I decided, but it was going to be done. And so I did that. It took about 6 months, but it's interesting because that kind of went onto the computer. Well, I didn't own a computer at the time. I had an iPad. So I was sitting there punching in on an iPad, which is a lot more work.
Yeah.
And it was rough, actually. I was struggling a little bit on the struggle bus when I first moved to LA. And, but I wrote this finished manuscript. And the thing about it was I proved to myself that I could do it. And it went from being, again, a goal every year or a dream every year, to being a goal that I actually did. And again, it wasn't very good. I always think about it fondly, but the truth is it really wasn't that great of an attempt, but it was a finished attempt. And that was part of, my mentality of having to switch from having a perfect book in my mind to having a completed one. And so after I wrote that, it was like 2 weeks later, I had this idea for a different one. And I just sat down, and it was like the floodgates had opened once I proved to myself that I could do it. And again, I had a lot more time. I had no kids at the time. I was living on my own, didn't know anyone in LA. So I had more time, but it took me about 3 months, and I wrote another manuscript. And that one ended up being my first published book. But it was that first one that I always point to of me just deciding, you know what, I'm tired of being the guy that says I'm going to write a book, because I've said that since I was a kid, and I'm going to become the guy who wrote a book.
Hell yeah.
And so then it was a whole process of getting, a lot of rejection letters, as every author goes through. A lot of rejection letters. No, this is no good. This won't work, whatever. But then I finally found a publisher to pick it up and got that second manuscript published. And it was one of those things where it was a big accomplishment for me to just change my mindset from having to be perfect to having to be completed, and then proving to myself that I could complete it. And that really opened the gates for my kind of writing from then on.
That's inspirational. I started a book and I thought it was going well, but like the story went in a direction where I didn't have it hit a roadblock but the character in the book was inventing something, and that invention, it turns out that invention already existed. And I was like, it just kind of stopped me in my tracks, and I didn't, I basically gave up, which I don't advise doing, because that's when, as soon as you give up, it's over. I should have, could have, would have, and still can, I guess, at this point, like backtrack a couple of steps and maybe invent something else. But I had the idea for the invention that, the guy was inventing in the book, and it was gonna, I don't even know where it was gonna go. Like, how do you know? Did you know the end of the book when you started it, or did it kind of just flow through you as you were writing it?
I did. The first one that I wrote, the one that I got published, the first published book, I knew the kind of basic plot point. I knew the beginning. I had kind of the first chapter in my head. And I knew the ending that I was writing to. But I wasn't, at the time, I didn't know anything about writing. I'd never been a writer, never knew anything about writing classes. I liked to write. I, just did it on my own a lot. But I had an ending in mind. So I basically just started writing, and I did kind of the snowflake or seat of your pants style, they call it, where you just write. You don't have an outline. Now, I've learned since that it's smart to have an outline. I'm still not very good at having an outline, because the current one, that first one was a novel. I wrote a fitness book that I'm actually shopping around now, looking to get published. And then I'm writing another novel at the moment. And this one, I don't know the ending to, and I'm going to be as surprised as anyone when it happens, because I know the plot, I know everything that's happening, but I don't know how I'm going to wrap it up. So sometimes to me, it's I like to get into storytelling mode, and I'll almost follow my characters around in my head, which sounds weird.
No.
Just let them discover it, and then I write it down. So I feel like I'm almost not even a storyteller, I'm a story watcher.
Yes.
And so sometimes, I'll have something I'll see will strike a chord, and I'll be like, oh, what, I'm going to put that in the book. Or a couple of scenes from the first book that I got published were from a dream I had. I woke up and I was like, well, that would fit right in with the book. And so I just changed, I changed the me in the dream to the main character, and there's a dog in the book, and it, is one of my childhood dogs in the dream, and I just switched it to the dog that's in the book, and it fit perfectly. Maybe it was my subconscious working on the book while I was sleeping. I believe in stuff like that as well.
Absolutely.
So it kind of comes in all different ways. But I think, for me, I started with a love of storytelling from my grandfather, But my mom was really big into reading. And so I credit her. She's, I dedicated my first book to her, because when I was younger, I didn't like to read, but my mom was like, you have to read. It makes you smarter. It doesn't really matter what you're reading. It just matters that you're reading. And so she would make us read like 50, 100 books a year. I mean, she would put so many books. You're a kid and you're like, Mom, it's summertime. I'm trying to play baseball with the boys. Like, I'm not trying to read 50 books. But she insisted. And so by necessity, I got much faster at reading, and then became so that I enjoyed reading. And so I would read just on my own. I would read 100, 150 books a year, and just kind of flying through them. I learned to read pretty quickly. And it's funny because then when I wrote the book and I finally decided, listen, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write this, and I know the beginning and I know the ending and I don't know anything in the middle. And then after I kind of shopped it around and whatever, and finally found a publisher and got it to an editor and all this type of stuff, it actually fit the kind of outline of a book really, really well. And I had never seen an outline of a book before. I didn't know, but just from reading, I'd literally read thousands of books, and subconsciously I understood like the plot points and the act 1, act 2, act 3. And so I naturally was able to kind of put that on paper without even knowing that I was doing it in the book, just because I had read so many books. And so it's interesting to me, because I credit my mom with really making me read and then giving me a love for reading, because that really helped me in the writing process. I didn't realize it until later, but then, I got with a publisher and whatnot, and they're like, oh, well, this actually fits the perfectly. There's very little to be, there's some editing, but, there's very little overall structural editing to do to it. And I was completely surprised, because I had never had one writing class about editing. I didn't know anything about plot points or any of that type of stuff, but it just worked because I had so immersed myself in it for so long. It
flowed through you. Do you have you heard of Stephen Pressfield's The War of Art?
Yeah, I have. Yes. Okay. I'm not super familiar, but yes.
Well, because he talks about the muse and just sitting down to write and letting the inspiration, you just sit down, you start writing, and whether it's good or bad, every day you sit down and you do the work. Were you doing writing on a daily basis, or kind of like what was your method for completing that first book to make sure it got done?
I was. And again, I had a lot more, now I have 4 very young kids. At the time I had none. So I had far more. I thought I didn't have time, but I actually had a lot of time looking back on it.
Yeah.
But yes, so I had set her aside, and I would have 2 or 3 hours where I could write. And I have a process where I'll turn on, kind of a playlist of movie soundtracks that I put on that kind of get me in the mode, and I'll sit there. And again, like working out for me, it's kind of a discipline where you sit down there. And I decided I was going to sit at the computer, or iPad in this case. And I said, you know what, I'm sitting here for my 2 hours today. And if I write 2 sentences, then that's what it is. And if I write 2,000 words, then that's what it is. And some days I would sit there and write a sentence and erase it, and write a sentence and erase it, and sit there and stare at a blank screen. And to me, it was a lot about the discipline of the process of just making myself sit there and making myself learn how to write a book or to finish a book. And so some days it would flow. Some days I'd be sitting there, and 4 hours later, I'd look up and be like, man, I just knocked out 4 chapters and I think it's flowing pretty good. I don't even want to stop right now. And some days you're like waiting for that alarm to go off, and be like, okay, 2 hours and I got 3 words done. So let's try again tomorrow. And so for me, that was the process. Now, then I had some kids, getting into the foster care and adoptive, and then had some biological kids, had a lot of kids in a very short period. So my time went from having, some free time to nothing, less than nothing. And so my writing took a hit, because I had to try and figure out how to change my process, because I kept waiting until, for me in my head, I was like, okay, I need to have this kind of 2 hours where I can kind of get in that mindset. I can put myself into this world, because that's what I would do. And like I said before, kind of follow these characters around and just observe them. And then I realized, with 4 kids running around, I'm interrupted too often. Exactly. I don't have 2 hours to set aside to get into the mindset of writing. And I had to change my mindset to say, okay, John, you're smart enough and disciplined enough to be able to figure out a new method, because the old method, you keep waiting for it to come back so you can write another book, and it's not coming back. It's gone for probably 18 years. And so I said, okay, I need to be able to, at the drop, instead of take 20-minute process of turning on my music and getting into it and reading a couple chapters and going back on what I wrote and get the blood flowing and get the mindset flowing, I said, you got to be able to sit down and write 20. If you have 20 minutes, if you have 15 minutes, if you have 5 minutes, you have to be able to sit down and deliver in 5 minutes or deliver in 15 minutes. So it took some work again, because it was like relearning a whole process again for me, where again, when I had a couple hours at first, it'd take a long time to get the juices flowing. And then it gets shorter period as I got better at it. And then I had to start over again and be like, I've got to narrow that window down to like 60 seconds. I got to be able to sit down and say, okay, let me crank out. I got time for 200 words. Let me crank out 200 words in the next 15 minutes before the kids get up or before this happens, whatever. And so I had to change my process a little bit. So with the last, year or two, I've started really writing prolifically again, because I kind of had to develop that same mindset I had before. It doesn't have to be good. It has to be done. There's a famous author, and I don't even know who it is, but you hear this quote quite a bit about, I can fix a bad page, but I can't fix a blank page. And I kind of had to get in that mentality of, I can go back and fix a bad page, but a blank page, there's no fixing that. And so I had to change my mindset of it once I had kids, and almost develop a new routine where I said, okay, how do I sit down and immediately get myself into the writing mindset? And so my process was one thing, and I've had to develop a new process, kind of in my more recent time.
Well, I'm thinking, you might be in the midst of maybe some family time or something's happening, and you might have an inspirational thought, and you're like, oh, I need to go write this down.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that has happened, or,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it used to be, I was, when I first started writing and decided I was going to do that first manuscript, I was single, and shortly thereafter I met my wife, and we weren't married yet, but we would spend some time together, and sometimes we'd be out to eat or something like that. And I'd be sitting there, and she could tell that I was like gone, because my mind went to that place, and suddenly I was following this character around in my head, and I was like, oh, that's what they do next. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, and so I would then go and like run to my room or whatever, or go grab the iPad and try and write it up really quickly. I've had to now learn, because inspiration will strike at any time. I've had to now learn how to kind of bullet point that, so I can say, okay, I can pick up my phone, and in my notes app, I punch out like, okay, I got this whole scene in my head suddenly. I don't want to lose it, but I don't have time, because I got, my son's climbing on my head, my daughter's pulling on my arm, my other daughter's asking for a glass of milk, whatever it is. I've got to be able to just punch out, again, developing this new process, I have to punch out a few things that will remind me of what I'm doing, so that later when I have a time, or I'm an early riser, I find that I call them found hours. Once you stop having free hours, you got to have found hours where you find time to do things. And so for me, one of the big one is I have to just get up earlier than I normally would.
What time do you get up?
Sleep less. Usually about 3 to 4 in the morning every morning.
Whoa.
So yeah.
And what time do you go to sleep at night?
Between usually I try and be in bed 10, 11 p.m., something like that. Yikes. I've always been able to function on, less sleep than I think most people normally do. Okay. If I get 4 to 5 hours, so long as they're consistent in a row, then I'm fine. Like 5 hours to me, I could survive on 5 hours a night. My big problem was having a lot of young kids, and we had 4 kids within 2 years. It was interrupted sleep. So it would be like 4 hours, but it would be like 1 hour, and then I was up for 30 minutes, and then another 30 minutes, and then I would be up for another 30 minutes, and I would sleep for 2 hours, and then I'd be up. And it was really kind of hodgepodge sleep, which was one of the problems of me trying to still stay, in the mindset of being able to get up at 3 or 4 a.m. I would be exhausted. Wow. As opposed to sleeping for 4 or 5 hours in a row, I would be just fine.
Wow. Yeah. My problem ever since I got out of the Army, I don't know what happened, because I used to sleep through the night like a normal person, but I wake up anywhere from like 4 to 8 times a night. And I typically I'll just get up, walk, around the house for a few minutes. I don't know if I'm restless, or I don't know why I could not stay asleep for more than like 3 or 4 hours. If I, like you just said, if I actually stayed asleep for 3 or 4 hours straight, which I always like right around 4 a.m. because by 4 a.m. I've woken up like 3 or 4 times, and then when I get up and I see the clock is 4, okay, I'm like, okay, now when I go to bed, I know I'm going to sleep till about 7, and that is like my like sequential sleep time where I know I'm gonna sleep straight through. And I've been having the wildest dreams, and I've been writing them down, and I don't know that it would materialize into a book or anything, but actually I was writing in my journal this afternoon and this morning, it was kind of vague because sometimes, you know, you remember dreams pretty vividly, and then other times they're kind of foggy or just not as vivid. And this one, unfortunately, was not quite so clear, but I do recall, or I was describing it kind of like as a movie set in a movie theme, because I was like in an apartment, and then someone came to the door, and then I was being chased, and then I was literally in my dream in a movie set, and so there was some big crash that occurred, like a fire truck ran into the ledge on the top of a parking garage, and my wife was standing right next to me, and like she pulled something, and nothing, I didn't feel anything, but she pulled something out of my neck, because there had been like a piece of shrapnel that was like stuck in my neck, and it ended up being like a computer chip. It was really weird, but she pulled it out, and I didn't like die. There was no blood even. It was, you know how dreams are very strange.
Yeah.
But that was really cool that you said that your mind kind of helped you, you know, in just working on the book or finding, like, continuing the story, and your subconscious, I could totally see that as like super plausible. And, you know, you're working on something so much and thinking about it so much, and then, you know, you might stop thinking about it consciously, but your mind never really stopped subconsciously. And it like filled in the gap or kept the story going for you. And you said you were able to like wake up and, or, you know, remember it and write it down and keep the story going with a dream you had. That's pretty.
Yeah. Dreams are fascinating to me because they're so real, no matter how crazy they are when you're in them, no matter how much you are violating every law of physics, every law where you'll go into a house and it'll somehow be bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. But when you're in the dream, it's completely normal. You don't even think about it. You don't even think about that you go into your childhood house somehow, and it's also somehow the White House, and it's like, you know, somehow 7 stories tall, but when you look at it from the outside, it's one. You don't think about any of those things, and it violates every law that we know. But while you're in the dream, it's the most real thing that you've ever experienced, and it's so totally crazy normal to me that all of it is totally normal. You can see people at different ages, and it's completely normal to you. Meet people. It's fascinating to me, just the whole world of dreams. And then they're the most real thing, and you could wake up, and at first they're the most real thing. When you first wake up, you're like, oh man, I got to tell people about this. It's going to sound crazy because I got to explain to them how the onion gets bigger the more you peel it instead of smaller, but I got to explain this to them. But it's so real that you want to tell people all about it, and there are all these fascinating things about it. But then also it's smart of you to write it down, because a lot of times it's so real in your head, and you think you're going to remember it. Like, this is something I'll remember forever because this is like super real to me. And then as the day goes on, it's almost like smoke. Like, you know, it's there somewhere, but you can't really wrap your head around it. You can't really wrap your mind around it. Suddenly you're back in the real world, so to speak, where, you know, there's the laws of physics and gravity and all these things that suddenly reapply to you. And you're like, well, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. How do I even explain this? And so dreams are they're fascinating to me anyway. But I like to pull little pieces from different dreams, or little pieces, little scenes, things like that from different dreams. And I feel like, as you said, sometimes your mind is working, so you get stuck on a plot point, or you get stuck on something, and you say, okay, I got to put this aside and not worry about this. But your brain, when you go to sleep, is now suddenly free to worry about it in a good way. It's free to work over this problem. And sometimes it can solve the problem for you. It's the same thing when I get stuck in writing. I feel like one of the best things that I can do is, interestingly, go get a massage or go and do an early morning workout. And I feel like something about getting the body movement kind of frees up the mind, and suddenly this plot point that I'm working on, this thing that I've been stuck on for so long and really cannot figure out, like you said, how do I figure out the fact that I invented this invention that's already been invented, and how do I move on from there? I'm so stuck. Where do I go from there? I should just quit. And you just get so frustrated at it. And for me, doing like a really early morning 4 a.m. workout or something, which I often have to do, or you know, maybe an afternoon massage, it somehow breaks everything free, and suddenly I'm like, oh, okay, well, I can go this way with it, or I can redo this, or I can change that, and it helps break that free, which is, I think, as a writer, to me, life is obviously very into fitness, doing the fitness modeling and stuff.
Yeah.
It's intertwined. People try and keep it as like, it's either a mental thing. You got the people who are like, oh, it's all about, you do all mental stuff. It's all professors at universities and learning about this and that and all about this. And they don't work out at all and they have nothing to do with their physical life. Or you have all the, super jocks gym rats who've never read a book in their life, but they're, yoked and jacked. And to me, I don't understand the dichotomy. I don't understand the difference between why you wouldn't, I joke sometimes, like you can literally read a book while you're on a treadmill, on a cross trainer. Like you can do both at the same time. Why does it have to be one or the other for so many people?
Yeah, you can be like the complete package. I mean, it sounds like you are, and it's making me think of Lex Friedman, who's like a super genius podcaster, roboticist, but also, I mean, I guess he does jujitsu, and you could be more well-rounded by, he plays the guitar, and I believe he writes. I don't even know if he writes, but he was a professor. Do you know who that is, Lex Friedman?
No, I don't.
It's okay. No. He's just like a podcaster, and he's been on.
I'll have to look him up.
He's very inspirational. I like him, and I listen to a lot of podcasts. I've just started reading more and writing, and I don't know. The writing came from a place of almost like despair or something. I was just like, my thoughts were and I was mentioning like the seasonal depression at the beginning and having to go to California to the beach. And when I went to California to the beach, I was walking along the beach and I had actually, how they'll have like a notepad and a pen at the bedside table or something at a hotel room.
Yeah.
Well, they don't have those anymore, by the way.
Yeah.
Typically.
Did COVID get them or what? Man,
no, I just think they're just probably reducing expenses, or at least at the hotel I was at, which was a pretty fancy hotel. But I took one of their little brochures and turned it inside out, and I put it in my pocket, and I took a pen. I had brought a pen, and I was... But so because I wanted to just like write down my thoughts to clarify like what is going on in there. You can talk, or if you're I don't know, if you're like listening to stuff all the time and not really expressing yourself in a therapeutic way. Like I just feel like I was in need of clarifying my own feelings and thoughts on paper. And because I talk in podcasts, but I typically am interviewing someone else, and so it doesn't really, I'm not really expressing myself too much, although sometimes I talk a little bit more than I should when I'm interviewing someone. And I was going to therapy, but my therapist said that I was good, which I had been going to him for quite a few years. And like 2 years ago, he was like, "You're good." And I was in a really good place, and I have been, but something along the way happened, and I just like hit a mental place where it was like not terribly healthy. And so at the beach, I started just writing what I'm observing, writing what I'm feeling and thinking, and then it started like flowing. And now I have probably maybe not 100 pages, but I'm just like writing everything, and I'm really enjoying it, and I'm feeling so much better. I was just talking to my brother before we hopped on here, and telling him how rejuvenating that trip was, and what I'm doing to, like with the writing and how much better I'm feeling. So you're living in Southern California, so you don't really even have to go anywhere. Although I don't know that LA is, I never really spent a whole lot of time in LA. When I did go, it looked kind of trashy in certain areas. When you go to like to visit the stars on the sidewalk
When I first moved here, I was, again, I'd spent 3 days driving in my truck. I was exhausted. I was, lonely and sad from leaving, 28 years, a big family, all my friends, I went to college in Memphis, everything. So I was in a really bad mental state. And again, I didn't know anything about California. I had never been here. I came here one time for a couple of days, just flew out here to kind of investigate before I came.
Smart.
And didn't know anything about anything. Even when I got here for that trip for like 2 days, I just rented a car and drove around. And I looked, it's back even before GPS. So I had just gone on like Yahoo Maps or something and printed off like, this is cheap apartments type of thing. And I would just drive to them. So I didn't even know the difference between like Beverly Hills or Santa Monica, or like, I really was such a rookie. It was so bad. Surprised I survived. And so I went and looked at like, studio apartments, because my mindset was like this price range. And so I'd go look at studio apartments that were still twice that, by the way, but they would be like 300 square feet in like Koreatown and Inglewood. And when I first drove out here, I was driving down the 101 and I got into Hollywood and I was like, oh man, this does not look like anything I've seen on TV. This looks really bad. This is it's like graffiti everywhere and trash all over the place.
Right.
And it was not the dream that they sold me of Hollywood when I would watch it television.
Right.
And
it wasn't
so,
Beverly
again,
Hills 90210.
It was not. Yeah. You find out later when you're driving down Beverly Hills and they got the wide streets with the palm trees and not a piece of litter bubble gum to be found within miles. You realize that there are certain areas. And I love LA. I've been here 12 years now, so I love LA. Now I'm in Manhattan Beach, which was always my goal. As soon as I discovered Manhattan Beach, I was like, okay, one of my goals to live in LA was to get to the beach. And so for me, like you're saying with the beach, I've been fortunate enough to be able to, after many years in Hollywood and West LA and all over the place, I was able to get to Manhattan Beach. And so now that's one of the things I'll do. Like you're saying, I'll just go down there and sit there and watch the waves crash and watch the sunset.
So nice.
And there's something so like just cleansing about it. Just watching the day erase and all the problems and everything just kind of go down into the ocean and then reset for the next day. It's one of those things, it's hard to describe to people who don't get to experience it on a regular basis or haven't experienced it. Because it's one of those things I'll never get tired of. Because anytime I'm feeling too much, too overwhelmed, too whatever, I can just go and sit there and, maybe it's crazy, but that's how I hope to die, just sitting there watching the waves roll in and out, and they'll be just fine. So to me, it's something so cleansing about that. And then like you're saying, watching the sun fall into the ocean and just the colors and the different, God gives you a whole new one every single night, every single time. It's completely different from the last, however many you've seen. And it's just unbelievable to me, but it's a great cleanser. It's a great, a reset for me, that I feel like you have to find those type of things in LA and in life in general. You have to find those things that you can kind of anchor yourself to, that will reset you, that will ground you, that will bring you back, that will cleanse you, all those type of things, whatever it is. Because, not just LA, but, the world in general, it can be a rat race. And so you got to find those things that can kind of bring you back to a good place, whatever that is for each person. My mom is, she grew up on a farm. So for her, it's like horses, animals, whatever, that type of stuff. So whatever it is for whatever person, you got to kind of find that. And so in LA, I think it's a really big deal to do that.
I know. Also just joined a jiu-jitsu gym, which I have been on and off in gyms since my 20s. So the last like 24 years doing jiu-jitsu, and it's so like all those words you were saying, grounding, cleansing, rejuvenating. It's fun. I love it. And I literally went to my first class since before COVID last night. And I was like, I fucking needed this so bad. This is so fun. And I'm going back tomorrow. I called a lady and told her, I was like, I'm joining. I didn't ask how much it was. I'm sure it's going to be a couple $100, but it's not anything in comparison to,
absolutely.
If you need it, the cost is not really a factor, at least not in this case for me. But fitness is a big deal for you and as well. So you were saying you get up early in the morning, but like otherwise sometimes to fit it in, like how else, how do you like fit that into your day with everything else you have going on?
It's always been for me kind of a non-negotiable. It's funny because, I got into it, I credit my dad with my fitness. He always worked out back in the, I grew up in the 80s and 90s. This is back in Memphis. And my dad he always worked out. He had a home gym in the garage, and he and a buddy welded together a bunch of equipment, and it was one of those things he did on a consistent basis. And so I grew up kind of thinking that was normal. And I didn't realize that he was actually the weirdo in the neighborhood at the time. People didn't have home gyms. They especially, maybe a Bowflex, they did not have like a squat rack, a power rack, a lat pull down, a bench press. And so he'd be out there with his, 1970s, 1980s headband and short shorts on, doing squats and deadlifts and all this kind of stuff. And I grew up just watching that, thinking it was normal. So then when I got into kind of high school, my brother and I started working out, in our home gym. And I didn't realize again until later, I was like, well, wait a minute, my dad's fit. All these other dads in the neighborhood are, overweight and, work to death and whatever. But it was always one of those things, even if my dad got cancer and really started losing ability, he still, that's one of the things he didn't lose. He kept it to the very last moment that he could. He still worked out regularly. And so for me, I grew up, kind of that being a normal thing. So when I started working out consistently when I was probably about 16 years old or so. And it just became a habit for me. Again, it was one of those things that grounded me. It was one of those things for me. It was a discipline thing. I could have a bad workout. That was fine, but I couldn't miss a workout. And so I could have a short workout. I could have a crappy workout. I could have whatever.
Are you talking every day?
Every day. I would work out 5 days a week. I've worked out for the last 23, 4 years, 5 days a week consistently. And, occasionally in there, I would go on vacation and plan a week off. I used to plan a 1 week off every year. But yes, 4 to 5 days a week consistently, that became kind of a staple for me. And again, they didn't always have to be all out workouts, but they were a regular thing. And, I started out in my dad's garage gym, me, my older brother, and then a friend of ours. And we'd just bang around kind of learning how to do things on our own, put up some pictures of Arnold on the wall some quotes and just like go out there and bang around, not knowing what we were doing. And it was funny because of my dad, people always ask, well, like, did your dad, because he worked out all the time, did he make you work out or ask you to work out or insist? Never once. I don't remember him ever even, saying you should work out every day. But it was just one of those things, me seeing him, sweat and work hard and, overcome obstacles and push through tough reps. And I would go out there and spot him and see him fail on a bench press, but get back up and do another bench press. And that somehow stuck with me.
He set a good example.
I always he did. And it wasn't ever by anything. He was a quiet guy. It wasn't there by anything he ever told us to do. It was just by watching him do it that it became kind of a thing for me. So I did that consistently through, beginning in high school, college. I remember when I went to my first big gym, it was a world gym. And I was like, well, my goodness, this is a whole new world here. There's equipment everywhere. There's a whole big world. And then I really got into the fitness thing, became a trainer, and it kind of became life for me. I moved out to LA and was fortunate to book some fitness modeling jobs. And so I got, kind of lucky at first and did Muscle and Fitness and Men's Health and GQ magazine. And so it was really big deal for me. Yeah, it was a really big deal for me to be able to be on the cover of some of the magazines that I grew up with my dad reading or dad seeing, and they were around. My dad would see these, Arnold and these other bodybuilders or whatever. And, he'd kind of read these magazines. And so it was a really big deal for me to then move to LA and be able to be on that. It was kind of a big moment for me. And so
was he able to see that?
He passed away. He saw my first one. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. He saw, I had shot my first one, but then he passed away shortly thereafter. So he didn't get to see kind of all the stuff that I'd done, which is,
at least he saw
it was very nice. Yeah, and my mom was always like, well, to your dad, when you said you were going to do something, it's always been kind of my mindset. When I say I'm going to do something, it may take some time, but I'm going to do it, like writing a book or, adopting kids. It's one of those things, even when I was young, I was like, I'm going to adopt kids. That's what I'm going to do. And so my mom told me one time, which was, meant a lot to me. She was like, when you move out to LA and you told your dad you're going to do these things, to him, it was kind of already done. So he didn't get to see all of it, but he already kind of in his head, it was already done. So he saw it kind of in spirit because, for him, John said he was going to do it. And John has that kind of just don't take no for an answer, willpower to go and see it done. So it meant a lot to me because it was kind of sad for me that my dad didn't get to see. He never got to meet my wife, never got to meet any of my kids, and never got to see any of these things that I accomplished that he really laid the groundwork for. In LA, adopting kids, having, I also have biological kids, having for LA a lot of kids, and especially all at once. My dad had a lot of kids at a time when it really wasn't very popular to have a lot of kids. And so he would have appreciated someone who went out and said, you know what, I don't care about, the money, so to speak. I don't care about what society says about you should be this and that and do something else. You just went out and did it. And kind of that's what he kind of did a little bit. And so, again, I credit him a lot with it. Not that anything he told me, but just by watching him do it, it sunk in like the dreams to my subconscious somehow. So then with the exercise thing, it's interesting because it's kind of comes full circle for me with COVID. all the gyms in LA closed, especially even more than, I feel like some of my family, they hardly even noticed COVID was a thing in Tennessee. In LA, it was a very big thing, and everything closed down. All the gyms closed down overnight. And so, I went from working out at the Mecca, Gold's Gym, Venice Beach, Muscle Beach, doing all this kind of stuff. And then, it's cool. And it's cool seeing someone kind of, again, I've seen Arnold there, talk to him a little bit, seeing some of the guys. Wow. So it's cool seeing some of these people that my dad kind of, his generation that he kind of looked up to. But suddenly the gyms all closed, and I was like, well, I've got this discipline where I work out 5 days a week. What do I do? And so, we had a pair of 15-pound dumbbells. My neighbor had a pair of 40-pound dumbbells, and my wife had an old bench that had been sitting outside for at least 3 or 4 years because we lived in a really small place. All 6 of us lived in about 900 square feet, but it was close to the beach. I got to watch those sunsets. Yeah. And we didn't even have a garage that fit everything, so we had a parking space. And it was like assigned parking, literally a parking lot, but we had an assigned parking space. So I'd drag all that stuff out there and just do workouts out, during COVID in the parking space. And at first, it was interesting because I was the weirdo, kind of like my dad was, with his headband and his short shorts, working out back in the 80s and 90s when home fitness was really not a thing. Fitness in general wasn't even a huge thing, but especially having your own thing. And so it was funny, as the pandemic wore on, you would look down the row of, parking spaces, and all the other residents would slowly they'd be like, okay, we better do this too. So at first people would walk along and I'm the weirdo out there. But I didn't have a lot of weight, so I'd work out. My kids would come out, and I'd be lifting my kids, and they'd jump on my back for push-ups, and I would be doing curls with the kids. They'd get in a bucket, and I'd be lifting them and stuff. God. That's funny. And so they started to enjoy it so much. They would be like, well, Dad, when are we working out today? Dad, when are we working out today? So my discipline suddenly, I didn't even need it anymore because my kids would be like, Dad, time to work out. We got to go outside, work out. Let's get our workout. Because to them, it was like horsey rides and spending time with dads and my dad, me, their dad. And, it was one of those things where suddenly they got to, I went from working a whole lot to spending so much more time with them. And so even now, we moved to a little bit bigger place here in Manhattan Beach, got a garage, and I built the home gym here, and I haven't been back out to a regular gym. It's been so nice because still my kids will come and work out with me, and I feel like now I'm getting the opportunity to give my kids what my dad gave me, which was the opportunity to watch their dad, try hard, fail, get back up after he fails, try a lift, sweat. Someone told me this one time, he's like, kids, they get to see often their parent go to the gym, and they see them, go to the gym, and they come back and they're all sweaty and tired and grumpy from working out, so they see the end result, but they don't see the process. And there's something in letting your kids see the process of you trying to lift a weight you can't lift and failing and getting back underneath it and trying again and sweating and doing something on a regular basis that doesn't look that comfortable. And that seeps into a kid's, subconscious. And to me, I was like, it rang a bell that was, very clear, because that was what happened with me watching my dad, going out to spot him in the garage. And so now it's funny because it's kind of a full circle thing for me. I get to now kind of give that same gift to my kids that I feel like my dad gave to me. And so I've even now, gyms are open here. LA's back to functioning as normal. And I still work out at home with my kids and, work out at the house here, and they still join in for curls and horsey ride. They're getting a lot heavier, so it's getting harder the more I do it, because it's like Milo and the bull. They don't stop growing, but it's been a really great thing for me to kind of have a full circle thing of what my dad taught me, and then be able to, in a small way for myself, teach my kids some of the same things.
That's so beautiful. That's so cool. I was just thinking about my dad, and he passed before I was able to, I just joined the Army, and SHEATH didn't exist. And I think they would probably both be proud of us, I'm sure, and what we've accomplished. Yeah. And so it got me a little choked up there for a second, you talking about that. So it's very inspirational, and that's really cool of you to be carrying that forward and passing that habit on to your kids, so that I'm sure they will carry that on to their kids and so forth. Yeah, because that's really good. My dad, love you, but he just drank. He would drink beers in front of TV and watch National Geographic and smoke cigarettes, which was cool, and he was great. But he didn't. A lot of them didn't know any better, I think, at the time.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you're fortunate to have had such a good example. And my dad was great, in his own way, but
Yeah.
you know, we all have our paths.
Yeah.
So you're writing, do you your fitness, I mean, you stay fit and stuff, but do you coach anyone else or do anything like that?
Yeah, I have clients, and
Okay.
I have COVID took a chunk out of that, but I have a lot of loyal clients that kind of stuck with me. But I do some coaching, some personal training.
Nice.
I write fitness blogs and a fitness book and things like that. So I'm very involved in the fitness world. Also, again, doing the fitness modeling and a little bit of acting and different type of things. I've learned in LA, you kind of got to diversify because, well, COVID can come out and wipe everything out in one day. Not to mention, a lot of other things can too. So for me, I've kind of kept my hand in a lot of different, arenas. But yes, I love to work with people. I love to help people because again, with fitness, I've seen such a huge difference in my life, growing up, in my brother's life, in my friend's life. I've seen how it's changed people, not just on the outside, because again, it's great having, abs and being fit and being healthy. All these things are great, but just the mindset, the confidence, the ability that it gives you in other areas of life is life-changing to me.
Hey, you
and I
feel
love
better.
being able to help other people. Yeah, you feel better. You feel more confident. I wrote something on Instagram today about, confidence and self-discipline are built through repetition. And working out is one of the great ways to do that, because the more you do something, the more confident you get at it. If I say, oh, I need you to lift 100 pounds, the first time you lift it, it may be a little bit tough and you're not that confident. You're like, well, that weight looks big, that looks heavy, I'm going to get hurt. You lift it a couple of times, you're like, well, wait a minute, I can kind of handle that weight. Your confidence gets bigger as you do it. So confidence, and self-discipline, they're muscles that you can train. And all of these, for me with my clients, I always work on kind of the mindset component of it before I work on the physical component. Because the physical component, I feel like I have an exercise science degree, several certifications, been doing this for a long time. You can go online and find a workout that, somebody's written, anybody's written, any random trainer in LA, of which there are thousands, can give you a few sets and reps to do. But, changing what you do is relatively easy. Just saying, oh, okay, I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to do a few reps. But changing what you are is something completely different. Going from someone who is, let's just say lazy, or someone who skips workouts, or someone who would rather sleep in than get up early when it's difficult, or someone who just eats any food because it looks delicious and it smells delicious and you're hungry at the moment. That's one thing. But becoming someone who says, okay, I have the self-discipline, the willpower to say, I'm not going to eat this because I have this goal, or I'm going to get up and work out, even if the workout is crappy, much like my book. I'm going to finish this book, even if it's crappy. I'm going to work out, even if it's crappy. That person can do a whole lot of different things. That person is someone who has changed not just what they're doing, as in getting a few reps, doing a little workout. That person has changed what they are, which is someone who can do something difficult even when they don't feel like doing it. And that person who can do something difficult even when they don't feel like doing it can accomplish anything else. You can go into the business world and accomplish what you want. You can go into, for me, the foster care system and accomplish what you want to do. You can go into your family. You can go into your relationships. You can go into the gym, and it transfers across your life, as opposed to just saying, okay, I go to the gym and I do a few sets and reps every day. That's a fine thing. That's changing what you're doing, but it's not necessarily changing what you are. So for me, when I work with people, we focus on changing what you are. Let's not just say, okay, let's do a little of this and a little of that and you'll feel better about yourself. We say, let's foundationally change what you are from what you are right now to what you want to be. And the person you want to be can accomplish anything else. And so again, going back to me, I don't understand how people separate the physical from the mental. To me, it's one helps the other. If you're strong mentally, you can be strong physically. If you're strong physically, you can still be strong mentally. There's no reason for me in my head to say you got to choose one or the other. You either got to work on your mental strength or you got to work on your physical strength. To me, they multiply each other. If you work on one, it's a multiplier for the other.
Yeah, I mean, if anytime I'm stressed out or hit a mental roadblock, or I go for a run, and a lot, like if I have some problem that I'm dealing with, like with business, I go for a run, and a lot of times, every time, the solution comes to me halfway through the run, and I'm like, okay, too easy. And if you're ever feeling like stagnant or, like lazy, for instance, and I feel like, again, just going for a run, it builds momentum in your life, and then you can carry that momentum on in, your business or your work or your whatever you're doing, writing something. I feel like for me, fitness has always been a very key component in my mental health,
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
Well, to your point too, I'm a big believer in creating positive momentum. I talk about this a lot with my clients. We're so easy. You talk to people who start a New Year's resolution or whatever, and we're so hard on ourselves. We say, okay, you could work out 4 days a week, and if you miss Friday, you're suddenly like, oh, well, I'm a piece of trash. I can't do this. I knew I couldn't do this.
yeah.
This is what my dad told me, what my PE teacher when I was in high school told me, that I'm just a lazy whatever. And you erase 4 days of really good hard work for one thing. And so I'm all about, for me, creating positive momentum, getting small victories and let those victories compound. So when I start with people, we always talk about not setting our goals too high. You want to overperform and leave room for momentum and excitement and positive energy to parlay that into the next goal, as opposed to saying, ooh, I set my goal so high and I barely made it. Now I got to drag myself to try and do the next one. It's a losing proposition.
Yeah.
But it's like building a snowball. And, my fitness book, I talk about this. It's in my fitness book I wrote, it's 30 days, and each day has a mindset component and a physical component, and it's 10 minutes a day, and you read it, and it's kind of each day is a different concept, and then you have a little physical challenge and a little mindset challenge. It takes 10 minutes total, but each day kind of snowballs. So you get a little bit better and a little bit better. But the first chapter talks about how it's trying to build a snowman. And if you have a snowball and you crush the snow together and you try and make a little snowball, it's easy at first. You crush it too hard and you smash your little ball and you got to do it over again. But the more you get that ball and you compact it, and the more surface area you have, you start rolling it. And at first it's very difficult to roll. But once you get it going, you got a little momentum in it. It starts picking up more snow. The more you roll it, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
And then eventually that ball gets so big and so strong and so powerful that you couldn't stop it almost if you want to, like with my workouts. At this point, I've been doing this 20 plus years. If I tried to miss a day, my discipline says, nah, I don't think so, Bob. You better get on out there and get this workout in, because the snowball is so big at a certain point that the momentum keeps it going on its own, because it's like a snowball rolling downhill. You develop that process that actually does the work for you. So instead of having to start over with a snowball all the time like people do, you want to just get the momentum, the positive momentum going, and let that work for you. And then once you get that positive momentum going, you get that positive mindset going, you get that positivity going, the snowball gets bigger and bigger, almost without nearly as much effort as you have to put in at the beginning. And so if you're willing to do the kind of hard work to put the ground, to build a good solid core of that snowball, you can take it so much further, where it'll be so easy, relatively speaking, it'll be so easy in the long run. But people don't do that. What they do is they keep trying to, shortcut the beginning of it, start a new snowball all the time. Yeah. They get too aggressive and they break the snowball and they have to start over. And they constantly find themselves just sitting in the snow with a broken snowball saying, man, I knew I couldn't do this. I've tried 100 snowballs. Every January I try this and it just doesn't work. And at a certain point, they're almost unable to do it because they've failed so many times. All they've done is taught themselves to fail. All they've taught themselves is to crush the snowball and start over. And so it's, to me...
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, to me, it's spending time on the foundation and getting that positive momentum going will take you a whole lot further than being super aggressive, crushing the snowball and starting over every January.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, but as you were saying that, I love that analogy, by the way, but my fitness, momentum started when I was in middle school, because I wanted to make the basketball team and I was not good enough. So I had to try really hard. And that progressed through high school, up to about my junior year, where I ended up getting into some trouble. But for 6 years, I had to try harder than everyone else because I was the least physically gifted or talented or coordinated. So I created this work ethic that has since like lasted, 30 years later. But so I developed that momentum from a young age. But is it ever too late to start?
Yeah, no, it's not. To be honest, I get this question quite a bit because people are like, oh, now I'm in my 40s or my 50s, my 60s, and I've developed all these bad habits and I have to unwind all these bad habits. I have to, I've got all these neural pathways in my brain where my brain naturally, it's like digging kind of a ditch, and your brain naturally thinks this one way. And we all have them. We all have them mostly from childhood. We have them from habits we developed. And the more you do it, the deeper that ditch gets, and the deeper that ditch gets. So for me, again, with the exercise starting young, that ditch is so deep in my brain that my brain automatically falls into like, well, I got to go get a workout real quick. Even if it's crappy, even if it's short, even if it's whatever, my brain, that's my natural inclination. So the problem with starting later is you have all of these ditches that when you're trying to dig a new ditch and a new neural pathway that says, I'm going to stop being a workout skipper and I'm going to start being a workout doer, no matter how I feel, I'm not going to listen to my emotions. I'm going to listen to my self-discipline and do this. It gets harder because it's easy to fall into the old ditch because you're trying to dig that new one and it's just a groove. It's small, but if you get out of that groove even a little bit, it's easy to just kind of topple over and fall into your old ditch of your old habits. And so
I think that's where having a coach could come in handy.
Absolutely, because I think that's where it is. And not just any coach, a coach who understands the mindset aspect of it, because there's plenty on Instagram in LA, all over the world. There are plenty of coaches who can get in, give you workouts, give you a few sets and reps, as I talked about earlier. But when you're trying to dig that new ditch, you need a coach that can help you get out of the old ditch when you fall into it, because that's where people get stuck. Because if you're young, you don't have as many of those old neural pathways to kind of get stuck into. When you get older, you have them. We all have them. We have all ways of thinking, ways of acting, things that are natural. And when you get uncomfortable, your body just flips right into that natural one. So you're trying to dig this new pathway, this new ditch, I always call it. And you get off track, you get knocked off, you go out of town for a week, you come back, it's, you ate like trash, you slept like trash, you feel like trash. It's hard to get back out of that old ditch because you go right back to your old ways. And you need someone who can help you climb up out of that ditch and get back and say, no, let's keep digging this new ditch because it seems uncomfortable and it really sucks because this new ditch is like 2 inches deep of a groove and your old ditch is 6 feet deep where you can bury yourself in. And you have to go back and have someone who can coach you to get back up the cliff and get back in the new cliff and say, keep digging. And eventually this new ditch is going to be 6 feet deep too. And your old ditch is going to be a thing of the past where you can't go back into it. And so it takes time. The problem with, again, people who are a little bit older is they have so many of these old neural pathways that it's too easy to fall into them. And oftentimes, to your point, they don't have anyone who can coach them and help them out of them. And because it's hard to, again, like falling into a 6 or 8 foot hole, it's hard to pull yourself out. You need someone at the top who can throw you down a rope and say, hey, this is how you get back up. Now let's get back over here and start digging this ditch again. And so that's where it helps having a coach who will not just approach things from a physical standpoint, but from a mental standpoint, because physically you can do this or that and something else, but that's only changing what you're doing. That's not changing what you are. That's not changing the neural pathway that you're trying to dig.
Well, I think that you would be a great coach just by talking to you for an hour. I really appreciate you taking the time and letting me get to know you and the audience get to know you a little bit better. Jonathan Prather, you're an inspirational guy.
Oh, thank you so much.
It was a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, it was great talking to you. Thank you so much for having me on. I really, really appreciate talking with you. And, I love your podcast and appreciate all the good that you're putting out there. And thank you. Yeah, thank you for taking the time to talk with me.
Yeah, very cool. And so where can people find you?
So I have my website is johntprather.com, JOHN and the letter T, PRATHER. Also, I'm on Instagram, John T. Prather. Basically, John T. Prather, you can find me about anywhere. So Instagram, Twitter, everything is John T. Prather. But my website is kind of the hub where you can go to find my book, find my Instagram, find my blogs that I write about fitness and adoption and foster care, those type of things. So you can find all that stuff on johntprather.com.
johntprather.com. You're an amazing person. Thank you again. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for another episode of the Robert Patton Global Podcast. We'll see you again next week. Peace.